Now, this is going to be basically a preface to A Clockwork Orange because it's a huge film, and in terms of the specific topic of fascism, it's perhaps one of the most canonical films and still very deeply divisive. Roger Ebert lists it as one of the worst films he's ever seen. And I understand where Ebert is coming from because superficially, if you don't pay close attention, it seems like Alex himself is the essence of a fascist, right? He's very theatrical, he's very creative, he's extremely violent. He creates a mythology about himself, and he works with a small gang to terrorize people. But I think if we look closer, it is not in any real sense pro-fascist. And on the contrary, Kubrick is making a very anti-fascist argument, but he is giving the fascist a very strong argument because when we see Alex and how they act, it seems like, well, isn't it justifiable that the state at least constrains them? And he's going to say, no, it's not justifiable, but it is a very close case. In fact, the very first people that Alex attacks are, for us, Nazis, right? They're these kids who are dressed up in these weird pro-German uniform outfits, and they're actually saving a woman, and it's a very cartoonish violence that begins the film. Again, people kind of forget that he actually does save a woman at the very beginning. Now, again, we have to be careful because, again, most of the film is told from Alex's point of view, and the point of view is unreliable. I mean, it's extremely unreliable. We're not supposed to, at any moment, really believe what Alex is saying or doing, so we have to be very careful that everything we see on screen may not actually be occurring. So we have to always be having a big question mark as to what is occurring and what is not occurring. But at a deeper level, I think people have missed that when he has this love of Beethoven, there's a very sly reference to the Nazis because, of course, Beethoven was taken over by the Nazis and used by them for propaganda purposes. Now, that might seem to link Alex to them, but I think it's quite the opposite. He's showing that, again, music can be used by any political persuasion, and there's something inherently free about music itself, right? It really can't be contained in an ideology. So, in a way, Alex is sort of reclaiming the music of Ludwig. And if you read the novel, he does listen to Beethoven. But he listens to a lot of different composers, but Kubrick chose really only Beethoven to be sort of what he's obsessed about because of this Nazi history in the background. And so we do see Alex with all his creativity, his love of music, his passion, and all these other things, and his very distinct individuality, right? He sleeps with a snake. So he's a very unique personality and very charismatic. But we do see the Druze at their worst. So it is true that, as some people have noted, there is a lot of allusions to conspiracy, the CIA, the MK Ultra program, and mind control, right? When Alex is eventually caught, he's subjected to this mind torture and turned into basically this vegetable, and he's being forced to watch Nazi propaganda films as a part of his indoctrination. And I think that's all well and true. I think clearly Kubrick is referring to the CIA and to these really grotesque and secret programs to basically feed people drugs and train them. However, I think the larger perspective, what Kubrick is arguing, is a very ironically theological point, as well as an ethical point, and one he never proves, right? That just there is free will, right? He has the priest who says, unless you can really choose, you're not really a full human being. You have to be allowed the choice. To choose good and evil is constitutive of being a human person, and by denying that, Alex is, yes, he's done some horrible things as well as some noble things, right? It's very complicated. But he's no longer a real human being, right? He's a literal clockwork orange. He's sort of this halfway between a machine and a man, and he becomes the victim of, ironically, the Druze, right, who join the authorities. And there's a lot of little clever commentaries on the Bible and sort of the Christian legacy, right? Alex has these Jesus statues, but also when he's captured, he's dunked in water. And traditionally, water is linked to purity, but here it's kind of linked to impurity, right? That he has to suffer, and that the water doesn't really help him at all. So for the most part, we see the fascist side repressing him. We see the sheer evil of this kind of new Nazism in this state, using propaganda and the mass media to control people, and using, right, Alex, ironically, to scare people to death to accept their authority. But we do see the left. Now, the left does not have power in this film. But the left is not innocent, even though it's victimized by Alex, right? There's that great sequence where he bursts into Alexander, who tellingly is a writer, and we're not going to go through the, very, very controversial rape sequence, and there's no nice way of putting it. It's clear that's what happens. But even though we should sympathize with Alexander and his colleagues, they don't really have much of a different agenda. They're going to do the same thing that the state does, right? They're going to manipulate Alex. They're going to use him. Again, admittedly, it seems like a good purpose to expose the MK Ultra program or the Ludwiko treatment in the film, but they don't really have a much more noble purpose. They want to take over the state. I think clearly Kubrick is saying we would be no better off. They would just create their own kind of program, their own kind of indoctrination system. So it seems like extreme pessimism on both sides, right? There's only going to be fascism from the left or the right. Whoever controls the state is going to kind of control the individual. But I think Kubrick does end it with a very kind of weird optimistic note, right? Because Alex is cured, right? He's not able to be controlled by the program. A lot of people have jumped, well, he's just going to return to his old ways. I don't think there's any evidence that's going to happen. I think he just leaves it just there. He's free, he can make his own choices. Obviously, most likely, he's going to make bad choices, but we don't know. We're just given listen, it was wrong for the state to do this. The state should not constrain people's free will in that way. It should not tamper with free will in that manner. It's just not justified under any circumstance. So what Alex does is up to him, right? We don't know for sure. We can make our own guesses, but that's it. He's just liberated at the end. And he basically is where he is at the very beginning, right? He has free choice that he was robbed of. So I think from that angle, it's still a very anti-fascist piece, but it's extremely difficult. And I don't think it's correct to say it's sexist, as some feminist critics say, but it's no doubt this is very biased from the male point of view. This is a very male ideal of freedom and liberty and justice. So in that regard, there's not too much agency for women. But if you do look closely, some women do exercise agency. Admittedly, it's very small, right? It's focused on how the male characters interact with one another. But I do think it can sort of stand up as a very good, strong general statement against anti-fascism. Or I'm sorry, against fascism per se. All right, this has been a general survey of Clockwork Orange. I'm going to do more detailed analysis, but I just wanted to do this very grand sweep of the plot and the characters, and I'll do something more in-depth soon enough. All right, this has been Partially Examined Kubrick on the Free Will Dilemma in A Clockwork Orange. Thanks for listening. If you like the content, please hit the like button and or subscribe. Please comment below if you can. Please share the content.